So thank you everyone for coming, and I just wanted to say also congratulations to the team at Filmgate. This has been a great day. Thank you for the programming. Excellent, thank you. I moderated a panel earlier where I mentioned that I was the business development director at Campfire. Long story short, Campfire is part of a company called The Mill, and The Mill is part of a larger company called Technicolor. And in that capacity, we do a lot of really interesting work, and there's a group in The Mill called the Emerging Technology Team, and we kind of come in and out of the door and kind of see some of the fun, cool stuff they're working on, but I've never really been able to get a deep dive into some of that stuff. And I've got a couple of folks here that are involved in those projects, and we're really excited to, I'm personally really excited to learn about it. As speakers, we have Sally Reynolds, who's a senior designer at The Mill, and Savannah Miles, who is a designer and product strategist at Magic Leap. And what I've asked them to do is to talk about augmented reality. And when one talks about augmented reality, it certainly also includes mixed reality and a whole bunch of other R's. And so this will hopefully be part education, sort of overview of what's happening in the space, and then we'll take a deep dive into some project work that both Sally and Savannah have been working on, and then we'll close out with some questions, and we'll open it up to the audience as well. So with that, I will turn it over to Sally Reynolds from The Mill.
Thanks very much, Mike. And thanks Filmgate for having us, and everyone who came to Filmgate. It's really a privilege to be let loose with a microphone. It doesn't happen very often. So as Mike said, I'm from The Mill in New York. We're traditionally a post-production, get off that page of us. We're traditionally like visual effects and have sort of been around the world for a while. And in the last couple of years, we've been expanding pretty rapidly in the creative technology area. And within extended reality, the sort of extended reality space, we've been lucky enough to collaborate with companies like IBM, Facebook, Magic Leap, Netflix, Warner Brothers, and plenty more. But first things first, we're here to talk about AR, but you might have also heard of VR and MR and XR. And I just want to clear up any confusion as to what it is we're talking about with all these different realities. Let's just quickly identify what all the acronyms mean. So virtual reality encompasses all immersive experiences. And this could be created using purely real-world content like 360 video, or purely synthetic content, so computer-generated, or a hybrid of both. Augmented reality is CG content on the real world that can superficially interact with the environment in real time. And with AR, there's no occlusion between CG content and the real world. So it's kind of like a sticker placed on top of the real world. And mixed reality is an overlay of synthetic content that's anchored to and can interact with real objects in the real world in real time. And mixed reality does exhibit occlusion, which means that the CG objects can be visibly obscured by real world things in the physical environment. And extended reality, or XR, just means all real and virtual environments generated by computer technology and wearables. And the X in XR is just interchangeable for any of the other letters. So in summary, this is my diagram. Sorry, I'm a very visual person. Immersing people, VR is immersing people completely in a virtual environment, or a monkey is completely in banana heaven. AR is creating an overlay of virtual content but can't interact with the environment, so the monkey's sitting on the table. Or MR is a mix of virtual reality and the real environment. It creates virtual objects that can interact with the actual environment, so the monkey can then hide under the table. And XR simply just brings all the different realities under one umbrella. So, given that you're sitting here today and the title of the talk, I'm going to assume you're all pretty excited about creating an XR and curious about working in it. However, if you've got any doubts or any questions, I kind of hope we're able to raise some more questions and answer some that you might have. This is the frontier of... Oh, sorry. Let me back up a second. I wanted to show you quickly that VR is not necessarily... Back to virtual reality for a hot second. VR is not necessarily in a headset all the time. And I think that's a common misconception about it. And I wanted to show you this quick example of how VR could be through your device or through your headset, through your wearable. I'm going to try and do this through AirPlay. 1 second. I apologize if any inappropriate notifications pop up while I do this. So this is an AR filter we made with Facebook, in collaboration with Facebook and Jurassic Park. Not Jurassic Park, it's Ready Player One, if you're familiar. And this is going to be H's basement, which is kind of his 80s decked out gaming environment. And everyone at work's really upset. I'm going to show you this because they think it's not very good work, but I think it's pretty awesome. And bear in mind that this was made, this operates at under 2 megabytes, which is pretty damn impressive, I think. Only I've got sound, sorry about that. But this is all based on sort of gyroscope technology, but it sort of shows you that you can take over the whole environment and have a controller that's not necessarily attached to your entire head, which I think is pretty valuable. And there's a lot you can get from 2 megabytes. All right. Sorry. I think I can move this side. Number 3. Smooth. All right. So this is the frontier of creative technology, and it's growing and changing right now at such a rate that we haven't even developed a common language or a rule book that we all share yet. Right now is such an exciting time to engage in immersive storytelling. We're truly writing the script and discovering new possibilities as we're creating. A really great example of how new and malleable this area is how we define and design gestures as controllers. How do we interact with content? Who defines what happens when you flick your right wrist up or like swish your left hand across your body? At the moment, I use about 5 different VR tools for as creative tools, and they all essentially do the same thing, but they all have slightly different gestures, which is kind of like when you jump from a Mac to a PC times 5, and all the keys are slightly different, but your brain is so hardwired to the shortcuts that you fumble around until your brain catches up where your fingers need to go. So it's actually very important that we figure out which gestures relate to which action and try and align them across platforms. As a matter of user flow and even ergonomics to an extent, we need to discover the best way for the human brain and body to engage with the gestures. I want you to cast your minds back to 2007 when Apple released their first touchscreen smartphone. Touchscreens were such a huge leap in interactivity and control. They allowed you to interact directly with the content. And this is even more important in XR because the content is so physical, it's so real. You want to be able to manipulate it with your hands. But touchscreens are 2D, and how many fingers do you use to control a touchscreen? You use 2. X and Y. But AR is 3D, and you want to be able to manipulate your content in 3 dimensions using your 3-dimensional hand and or body. I won't go too far down this path today, but think about gestures, the use of your hands, your faces, your bodies, moving your device or your wearable to control actions and manipulate your content and your world. Where are we up to? Nope. In a way, when designing and selecting gestures or actions, when designing and selecting which gestures or actions equate to an action in XR, I feel like we're actually reverting to a time before touchscreens. Since the age of computing, but particularly the age of touchscreens, we've had to invent certain commands that train our hands to coordinate to a certain combination of keys to a real-world action. But as we dive deeper into a 3D realm and tech gets better and better, we're actually turning a very, very real human actions into controllers that feel natural. For example, if I wanted to zoom into an object on a touchscreen, I would simply use 2 fingers and move them apart and I would zoom in. But now in XR, if I wanted to zoom in, I can simply just move my device or walk closer to the object. We had a pretty ridiculous situation demonstrating this at our office just last week, where a couple of devs are needing to see all angles of an object that creating an XR. And so instead of rotating the thing on a turntable in front of them at their desks, they're simply able to stand up and walk around it and have it as large in the space as they want to see the details. So they're sort of encircling the office, walking around all the people on the computers to be able to see it. And when you're so engaged in the content, it's really easy to forget where your feet are walking. And of course, my colleague, when looking up at the content, wasn't watching where he was going, walked directly into a stack of 3 cases of beer and knocked the whole thing over, and beer went everywhere all over the floor. So I feel like there's some sort of safety things to be put in place with those type of things. Anyway, as we speed ahead, creating and forging experiences in it, this medium is still being defined and prototyped. And to be involved in XR right now also means you're participating in defining the rulebook and the culture of how it's going to be used going forward. Okay, creatively, I want to share with you one of the challenges we faced when creating for this XR space from a very broad direction standpoint. At the very entry is the importance of understanding the nature and limitations and potential of the medium that you're working with. Before you engage creatively, you really need to understand that you're no longer in a 2D linear space. You're creating for immersion and an experience that's curated by you, but is now being driven by a singular viewer. I like to think of immersive storytelling like one of those choose-your-own-chapter novels. No longer can the author expect the reader to start the novel at the beginning and read the chapters 1 through 10 and finish at the end. Now the reader is driving the book. And they might start at the beginning, but which chapter they choose to go to next and where they choose to end is totally in their control. As the author, you still want them to experience the whole story, and so you need to write the book in such a way that it encourages them to engage with all the pieces in any order. The other thing to remember is that the audience is now singular. They're now going to experience your narrative on an order and length that's being driven by them. And whilst you could be gaming or interacting with your friends in a shared virtual space, so long as they're active, each person is still going to have a unique experience of your narrative based on their input. That being said, it's up to us to come up with new directing techniques to encourage the audience to experience things in the order that you would hope them to. For example, really simple example, how do you tell your viewer to look behind them and see a big monster creeping up on them without having a CTA on the screen like turn around? One such way would be to use directional audio. Have the sound of the monster breathing heavily to occur as though it's coming from behind them, and they'll turn around. Sound is almost always the trigger in real life for someone to turn around. If you don't have access to directional sound on the platform, then you might use a visual cue that induces curiosity, like smoke or fire embers slowly drifting past your shoulder that would encourage you to turn around and see where they're coming from. So how do you create content that's constantly breathing all around a person and yet hope that the person doesn't miss any of your creations? The narrative is now being driven by whether you can successfully encourage the viewer to being coerced into looking around or being where you drive their curiosity. Okay, so you need to think immersive and create for a singular viewer. Another challenge that seems to pop up for me personally is pretty much the exact opposite of what I just told you. And that is, once you get your hands dirty in XR, you start working on specific platforms and you begin to understand some of the limitations that might be at play, like file size, optimization, field of view, and so on. And it can be really easy to fall into the trap of shaping your narrative based on what's possible. I'd urge you to have your narrative prepared before you start altering it for production. At the end of the day, we're still storytellers. There should be an emotion, story, or message that needs to be conveyed to another human. Once you're in production, you might need to invent new methods of communication, but make sure you still have your original story in mind. Working in the industry I tend to see plenty of brands and companies wanting to create the hottest new thing, in the hottest new thing that's on the market. And lately, in the past couple of years, that has been AR. But you shouldn't just force a story into the medium because all the cool kids are doing it. A brand or a company should still be telling a narrative through the medium that best conveys the story. AR, MR, and VR are all really cool, powerful mediums to be creating in, and especially to be experiencing as the consumer. But the wheels fall off if the story and the medium were just kind of mushed together without any real consideration of why. There's always a fantastic way to tell a story through immersion, but just try and make sure the narrative and the medium are working and adapting to each other in tandem, and not just forced together. It becomes very obvious when you're experiencing something that is simply a linear story plopped into a headset. Take advantage of all the new ways you can engage in the 36 plus senses, and don't just stick the old school into the new school. Before I hand over to Savannah, I wanted to give you a quick taste of 2 more of our projects from this year that I sort of worked on. The first example I'm going to try and do through my phone again. Actually, I might do this in reverse order because the phone's a bit janky. To onboard you into the first one, I want you to imagine you have a ball of clay in your hands. And like regular clay, you can push and pull and bend it with your hands. You see its form change in front of you and move with your fingers. And now, imagine that clay is actually sound. That ball of clay is now your instrument, and you're using it to create an audiovisual composition right in front of you. This video I'm going to show you is about a project called Tanandi, which was a collaboration between Magic Leap and Sigur Rós, which we helped bring to life as an early access dev partner of Magic Leap. Tanandi means sound spirit, and this experience turns your environment into a garden filled with Tanandi. It's a place where sounds are visualized and surround you in space, and your every interaction with these spirits creates an oral and visual response, enabling you to engage with sound and music in a completely new way. Sound enough? That's a really short teaser. There's a 7-minute teaser online. I suggest you all go watch it. I didn't want to play it today, but it's really cool. And if you ever get the chance to use a Magic Leap headset, I definitely recommend you try it. And this last little quick one I'm going to show you is pretty simple stuff. And it was a filter we collaborated with Jurassic Park and Facebook on to recreate for Jurassic Park 2, I think. I'm not sure. I'm going to just try and launch it here and then hand over to Savannah. And I apologize if it's really loud. It has a tendency to be so. anywhere we can get? Oh. Is there any way we can get lights on the floor? No.
Can we turn the lights on?
Yes, sir.
Sorry. I need traffic markers. Thank you. Oh yeah, it's not so great in him. Sorry. You know what, I'm going to show you a pre-recorded video because it's not working really great. So this is our dinosaur for Jurassic Park on Broadway in New York. Is there any way we can get back sound on this laptop? Oh, sorry, I put it airplay. There he is. So again, this is AR, and it's under 2 megabytes on this platform, which is pretty impressive. And I just want to show you a quick comparison, and this is the kind of fun thing with AR, which I think you're aware of because you all use probably Snapchat filters and the like. The ability to scale stuff is kind of fun. So this is the same dinosaur, just really little. Yeah, bit of fun. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Sally. Okay.
Thanks so much. Hey, everybody. So I'm Savannah Miles, and I am a designer and a product strategist at Magic Leap. Just to kind of get a read of the room, who here's familiar with Magic Leap as a device? Okay, it's cool. So lots of people, perfect. So Magic Leap One is wearable spatial computing platform. It's a mixed reality system, and so there's some 5 key features that sort of defines Magic Leap One. But while I sort of talk through those, because they're a little boring and nerdy, I figured I would just show you all a little bit. It's a wearable display. I have it here, so later at the party tonight, I hope I can show you guys, or sometime tomorrow you can try it out. It's a biomimetic light field display, so the quality of imagery that you see in these capture shots definitely don't reflect what it looks like to see through device, when the light field is just much closer to how we see light. And it involves multimodal input and persistent and spatial content and spatial audio, which I think is really powerful. And so some of these experiences that you're seeing on screen I'll talk about in a little more detail. Let's see. Do I click? Okay, cool. So what I wanted to present today to you all, just to kind of piggyback on Sally's sort of excellent primer of the work and the possibilities, is a couple concepts to keep in mind when evolving your storytelling practice into spatial computing. So this is kind of a conceptual starter kit. Maybe best practices might be another way to describe the next few bits. So the first, I would say, definitely a challenge and an opportunity in this space is to make content that harmonizes the virtual and the real. So, here at Magic Leap, we often talk about designing with the best of bits and atoms, picking and choosing the best parts of digital experiences and the best parts of the real world, and harmonizing immaterial things with the material, like walls and tables. So that starts for us with the way we've designed the operating system for Magic Leap. We call the operating system the landscape, and what it is it's a in our system you can place your content and applications in the world, and they persist there. So if you put your screen's sort of movie watching app on the wall, it'll stay there. Next time you boot the device up, it's still there. If you place a game on the table, it'll also be there. And persistence is, I think, a lesson we can learn as designers of digital and interactive experiences. We can take persistence from the real world and bring that into our experiences. I think it's really powerful, and it's something that that spatial computing can do really well. Have real content persist in the world and narratives to emerge from that. But what's interesting about the landscape, about this medium, is while content persists in the real world, it's also reconfigurable, and as reconfigurable and flexible as digital things. So the harmony of persistence and reconfigurability is one of the first sort of moments of harmony in this medium that I think we can all think about when designing experiences for it. I think also a point of a second learning from the real world is this idea of object integrity. This is a phrase we use at Magic Leap, and Sally might be familiar with it because she led a team that developed a lot of our content and assets for us. But when virtual things look like real world things, and we can kind of suspend disbelief that they are virtual, that's really powerful. It's like something very native to the medium of mixed reality, and it's useful too. It gives our users, or it could give your audience a metaphor and a mental model for being able to understand this totally new medium. I kind of feel, here's like a hot take for, as a designer, I think skeuomorphism wasn't that bad. We all make fun of it now. We make fun of the leather-bound calendar app on our old iPhones, but at the time that was so critical to be able to bring the users of iPhones at that time into a new mental model of, get rid of your paper calendar. You now have this calendar in your pocket. And I think we need the same types of metaphors of the physical world to help users sort of understand new stories in this new medium of spatial computing. And just like in VR, I think earlier there's a great question around what VR tropes are we tired of? Are we going to get rid of? Skeuomorphism might be a mobile trope we're tired of and eventually have matured beyond. And I'm excited to see that same maturation in the field happen with spatial computing in VR. So a third way we can create mixed reality content that resonates with the real world is by authentically integrating that content into the physical environment. And the first way we can really do that is by paying attention to the boundaries of space, like walls and floors, and having content react to those boundaries. It's a unique capability of mixed reality and AR and mobile AR to some extent too. And I think in fact it's the whole point. And Create is an experience that our studios team created. This is a video that our team sort of captured, I think pretty casually at some point in the office. And you can see that the content is sort of grounded on the features of the environment, and this is so powerful. Collisions, I think, are a really awesome moment. One of the most fun things to do that you see people do in VR, but the same thing on our device, is just like throwing stuff and watching it bounce and hit the wall. And these simple types of interactions, they're really novel to users new to this field and authentic to the medium. But what this does is it often something to think about in terms of your experience is the step that this requires. And right now with the level of maturity of the technology, the step that this requires might be like a meshing step where you put the device on, in the case of Create, and before you can begin the experience, Create asks you to walk around the space and look at everything. And that allows the device, the computer vision in the device, to sort of register the features of the space, but that does take a little bit of time. So that's a sort of a logistical challenge too, to think about how do you plan that necessary overhead of mapping the space into the flow of your experience. There's also the very real possibility that the technology of computer vision, sort of spatial awareness, breaks. I mean, it's emerging technology. Any emerging technology, whether it's gesture or CV, it'll have moments where it breaks, and that's where I think we as designers and storytellers have to reach into this growing bag of tricks for how to make content that's really compelling and that is authentically integrated into the environment and authentic to the medium, but even when it has to kind of gracefully degrade. And a couple of those tools that are really good to have in your back pocket. One is portals. I know portals is the theme to some extent for this conference, which I think is cool because in VR and in MR and spatial computing, it's such a great metaphor. Like a portal is definitionally two spaces that don't connect but that are connected. And portals are so useful for having 3D content emerge from a wall or a floor where you may have to be kind of agnostic to your audience's physical environment where your experience will unfold. Things that float are really beautiful and easy. Space dust and particle effects look lovely on this type of display with the particular type of bloom of light that this display has. So these three things, I think, are portals and sort of beautiful ragdoll motion and like particle effects, I think, are really useful themes that are emerging in this space. Okay, so another aspect of authentically integrating your work into the real world is that you have to be open to spontaneity. So this is a tweet from a friend of ours, and he worked for a bit with us on the design of the Magic Leap operating system, and he took all the components of this game Create, which is a little bit like Minecraft. You have blocks and you have characters and you can put them places and do stuff. And he built like a swing and he put the dinosaur character inside the swing. And he put the swing on top of a tree. And so the swing was it was literally swinging on top of this tree. The video is awesome. If you search Paul Hoover on Twitter, you can look it up. And it was so unexpected. Like, we never thought people would use this device outside. We never thought they would mesh trees and put virtual content all over the natural world. And I think probably the Create team didn't anticipate that either. But what's interesting to me is embracing the reactivity of your application, of your experience, of your narrative to its own context is a form of interactivity. So emerging narratives in play, they're really possible when you design virtual systems and stories that react to the context of the physical world that they're in. And sort of building on what Sally was talking about, and also paraphrasing a couple points from a friend of mine, Chris Mallet from Somewhere Else VR, if you're familiar with that, London-based team. He talks a lot about the choose your own adventure route. The risk of designing that kind of interactive narrative is you run up against this term called like ludonarrative dissonance, which I'm sure some of you guys have heard, which is that trade-off between empathy and interactivity. Like, a highly interactive story could risk users being like very engaged, very empathetically engaged into like a carefully crafted narrative. So what he proposes is, if cinema uses the frame to direct user focus, we have to kind of come up with something else in VR and in spatial computing too. So although of course the bull and the matador relationship between audience and director of an interactive experience is always can be pulled off. He advocates for something he calls ontological design, which is the space as a story, like knowing that in XR, just as in real life, spaces have rules that direct behavior. We're quiet in a library, we look at things in a museum, we're like loud in a club, we act differently inside versus outside, and our spaces can direct users through an experience. We can take advantage of context, especially in spatial computing, where the content always exists in the real world. So we always can take real world context as a way to drive the story. And I think time, space, and audience attention can really become parameters for reactive narratives that are interactive because they're reactive. Like a shared stories that happen in a shared space among lots of people. I think it's an interesting place to explore. Location or object-based narratives, that's powerful, and there's a lot of cool work in that space. Stories that are told continuously or episodically in a real-world context, like Scam Austin, or I think spatial computing allows for so much exploration in this type of story. Where I'm personally really interested, longer term, in ambient experiences, stories that are told quietly from the peripheries of our attention. That's something so powerful and less easy, less possible, less natural in legacy media formats. And the simplest way to have reactive story elements, I think, sort of starting today, is just responding to user gaze. Gaze, signals attention. It's so fundamental to communication, and it's a fundamental input. It's the fundamental input in XR and spatial computing, because the FOV is limited. You have to look around and look at content, but a glance starts a conversation. We look at someone before we're about to speak, and in the same way, I think we've designed UI on Magic Leap 1 to be reactive to a user's glance. I think I have a slide about this a bit later, but when you look, or I'll jump ahead to it. or I'll get to later, but we have when you look at an application, its UI is generally hidden, but it makes itself visible at your gaze. And there's this beautiful experience developed a couple years ago on our hardware where it was a scene with a lovely tree and beautiful like natural elements, and there was a pond, and it just sat on your table and you looked at it. It was really simple, and as you looked at these tiny little flowers, driven by your gaze, those flowers would like quietly bloom. I don't think you realized as a viewer of this that was what was driving that moment, but it really did direct your behavior, and it was super lovely. And in this type of platform, we have access to so much user input. There's so much possibility to have story elements that are reactive to users' expressions, to their feelings, to their actions. That to me is so powerful. This input drives our avatars. So later tonight, I hope I can show some of you guys this experience, and I'll get into it in a bit more detail. But this, I think, is another way to bring in a new type of interactivity to the medium, which is by having sort of live acting being represented virtually through these devices. Two more best practices. One I think is so important. Less is more. And by that, what I mean, I'm sorry, I'm clicking multiple things here. We try as much as possible to keep the display clear. Every pixel you draw to this type of display is a pixel you take away from the real world. So you have to be really cautious about what you put on screen and what you put on display. Also, what I found, people ask me what's surprised me about designing for spatial computing, and the thing that has surprised me most is how high bandwidth the real world is. It was pretty wild. We actually had to have 3 people in this calling experience, this avatar calling experience, and one of them had to sort of watch the whole scene, and her head was basically the camera. It was a strange setup, and you'll similarly find when documenting these projects that strange setups are inevitable. So I'll show you a video of this experience, Avatar Chat, to give you a bit more context.
Hey, what's up, guys?
Hey, Kai, what's up? Oh, hey, Chef.
What's up, guys? Okay.
Awesome. That's good.
All right, guys, signing out.
All right, see ya.
So Avatar Chat is a sort of telepresence, telecommunication experience that's really embodied. It's really 3D, and the input from the device drives this avatar. So it's a cool experience, and we wanted to showcase it with a video that we worked with the Mill actually to produce. We've just really strong partners with the Mill, and Bo King from the LA studio was helping us. But I want to sort of walk through some of the process of making this video, because it was wildly difficult, and then sort of presenting like the wild difficulties that you might experience in the next couple of years as this technology emerges. So just trying to document your work. So it's a long story why there's a food truck involved in this shoot, but as many projects go, it started much bigger and it got a lot smaller. But we had this one scene on this food truck, and before we made any scene, we had to mesh the scene. By which we mean we had to, like I was referring earlier, we had to let the system sort of build up a model in its sort of understanding of the space of like where the features were, so that we could have the computer vision work and have occlusion work and for content to stick and for content to not wobble. And so this additional step was introduced into the filming process, where before every take, we would have to have somebody with the device like walk slowly around the whole scene and kind of bake the space, like let the same device sort of understand the environment. And once they did that, we had our director put the device on and actually film the scene just from wearing the device and moving his head. And we had a scene, that's some of the content that you can see over the truck. And we had somebody behind him with the computer kind of plugged into the device so we could capture really high quality footage from the device. But the camera is actually in a third eye position above your eyes, so you have to sort of internalize that what you see is not what you're going to get. You have to tilt your head down, you have to do certain stabilizations. It's really tricky. I think it's a challenge for us as the developers of the platform to make this easier for creators. In the meantime, it's difficult. Or to capture a scene where it looked like one of our actors here was drawing and seeing content. The sort of difficulty of capturing this footage was such that Bo, our director, was sort of the only one really good at it because he had sort of just a talent as a director. So he would often have to get really close to the actors to get their hands in to make it look like they were filming it. But it was really him doing a lot of the cinematography just by looking at the content. So that's a couple different. Best practices, things to keep in mind when you're developing for the system. I hope it's really helpful. And again, I have the device with me today. I want you guys to try it. So to come by me later this week. I'll have it all weekends. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Savannah. Sorry about that. So I'll invite Sally and Savannah up on stage, and we'll have a couple questions. Thanks for the water. So if I notice one common theme between both your presentations, it's dinosaurs.
Oh yeah.
So dinosaurs are all over AR and XR and everything.
I think any big animal. Big animals are impressive.
One question I have for you, Sally, and maybe you could go a little deeper on it. You mentioned when the demo, maybe it was the Jurassic Park demo, the size limitations that you have to work with. Could you explain that a little bit deeper? Because at first, like when I was first learning about it, I didn't understand why there would be size limitations. Right? We have fast internet now, right? We have mobile devices. So what's up with that?
So 5G is coming sometime in the future, and it'll all change this, but it's not here yet. And so a lot of democratized platforms, like at the moment the ones that I know of are really Snapchat and Facebook, where you as creators could go and make your own AR stuff right now without too much know-how and publish it. They have pretty specific size limitations that need to be able to work on a fairly new smartphones, be it an Apple or a Samsung device. So the size limitation is really to do with what smartphones can handle right now, and if it is on one of those platforms that doesn't require additional hardware, then it's limited to what the phone and the internet can handle. And at the moment, Facebook camera and Instagram give us about a 2 megabyte limit for that stuff, and Snapchat we don't work with at the moment, but I know they have about 5 megabytes to work with, which makes us really jealous. But if it's in VR or with a headset or other sort of computational devices, you get a lot more space, yeah.
And Savannah, it was so interesting when you were talking about the real world is so big in terms of getting it to be kind of the fidelity that we're used to, right?
Definitely, yeah. It's hard to compete with the real world.
Interesting. So if I were a creator and I decided, gosh, this was so inspiring, I want to make some XR work, where do I start? What are the areas that I can sort of experiment in, and how can I sort of start to make this type of work?
I'll kick that off with just by sort of rehashing what I was trying to say in my talk, in that as a storyteller or director, I would start right there. And I feel like, so creating for XR involves a lot of 3D and a lot of technology and sort of experts in a field, and maybe as a director you're not any of those things, you just want to tell a story. There's so many different ways you could enter it, but what I would say, whatever platform you're going for, whether it be VR or AR and size limitations and all that, start with your story and start by getting together all your ideas and put together a pitch that is very much like a traditional linear pitch, except you've thought about all the different experiential stuff as well. And like to even bring that down to a simpler level, I get a lot of friends come to me and say, hey, can you make this graphic that I've made into a 3D thing? And I said, is that all you've got? Like, do you know what the character does? Do you know what environment they're in? And if you think about all those things and sketch it out in 2D, you sort of bypass a lot of costs by making sure you have a really solid, traditional plan to start with. To the other end of the spectrum, where I know that right now Magic Leap has a $500,000 like come create with us offer. And so you could go all the way to the other end of the spectrum and sort of have a really big budget to work with. But that's where I would start. It's just like really getting your story together in a very sketchbook phase and have thought through a lot of the things you can before you go into any kind of production.
I would also, I'd start by sort of reading some of the best practices that are kind of coming online now in this space. We have a human interface guideline, a design guide online that a huge number of people at Magic Leap have worked really hard on, and I think it has some insights that are applicable broadly to the XR space, and I think reading that is an awesome place to get a sense of the work. Experiencing other work in the field is a great place to get started. I've talked with some people in here. I talk to Liana about this all the time. I think WebXR has a much lower sort of barrier of entry in terms of technical sort of requirements because the web is a skill set a lot of people have. It's easier to maybe jump on board than like procedural graphics or anything, or 3D math, and or a huge development environment. So I think that that's a great way to also get started.
Yeah, and I just want to iterate just off the back of that, and when we were listening to the last talk, I was sort of nodding my head the whole time because they were saying how VR tools have developed so much so that they're very intuitive, and if you can get into VR, I feel like all the tools, I use VR as creative tools in a design sense, just because they're really easy to use. And I feel like VR, there's probably a program I don't know about that already does this, but it's like, there's an After Effects just about to happen in VR, like you can just like plop worlds together, and it's really simple.
I would shout out to an awesome app for prototyping in AR called Torch App. It's really great. There's, I think, like you said, I think we're about to see so much talent be applied to this problem of how we empower creators and really broadly to be able to create and prototype really rapidly in the XR space. And if you are somebody with a lot of technical talent, you like to build tools for artists and creators, I think like that's a calling for you, is build something that can empower people. Is that maybe a good way to define it?
Yeah, it's like one object will affect another, and there's sort of a chain reaction. So they have this sort of movement that's a lot more, so I hate using the word organic, I use it a lot, but is more organic than, say, pre-scripted animation. But 3D, really, really high fidelity 3D is expensive, and I work at a company that charges a lot for really good high-end 3D. So I'm probably the worst person, I'm very spoiled. But again, harping back on the two things, I really think if you want something that's really high fidelity 3D, and that's what you're going for, then really, really plan it out before you get in production, and you can cut a lot of costs. Just don't prototype in high end, just like start in little things and then finish it at the end. The other thing is with any kind of immersive experience, and I think you've all tried them, you realize you don't need high fidelity stuff to give a sense of engage different senses. You can lose your sense of balance, you can feel things just with really minimal graphics or really basic fidelity. And engage, and we're sort of in this space that's very like gaming fidelity, and gaming's getting really good, so that's almost obsolete too. But you don't need high-end graphics to work in this area, I don't think right now.
I think that's a great point. One of the most powerful moments I remember having in our device was when I just saw, it was sort of when all systems were sort of coming online in the early phases of developing Magic Leap, and there was a very simple floating cube. It was just like a test cube, and it was sort of floating above my desk. And at that time, for content to stick to a place, it sometimes would break. It was still, again, like early days of Magic Leap. And I walked across the room to get something, but was still wearing the device, and I turned around, and it was still there above my desk. And it was so powerful. And I do think we're still in a phase where the novelty of this medium can really be used to your advantage to make incredibly compelling but simple, quote unquote experiences, and people can be really wowed by this. So visually simple experiences can be amazing in the right context with the right treatment.
I understand that this space is very visual, but just like in film, the soundtrack or the sound effects have such an important part in helping tell the story. How can we as creators use audio to go beyond just like, oh, cue to look over there, so loud noise over there, right? Are there things that we can do with audio to help sort of explore the storytelling medium?
I think I'm going to let Savannah talk about this a little bit more, because Magic Leap is one of the leading sort of spatial audio things right now. But this is so exciting, and I would say in film, or even like any experience in any sort of part of the industry that I work in, for me, sound is 80% of what it is, which is very controversial at the mill, but I think sound is so hugely important to emotion and can't be ignored in any of the mediums. And I know that Bose is about to release or have like this spatial audio situation, which I don't know much about, but I'm really excited to find out more.
Yeah, Magic Leap, a part of a key feature of our system is spatialized audio. So we have a sound field just as we have a spatialized light field, and it is really powerful. And it's something I think that is juicy in and of itself for creators to really play with. I was just talking with Gabriel, who might still be in here, and he was saying he has a background as a composer, and I think, visuals aside, there's so much to do with a spatially sonified experience. Like sound XR is like I think a whole field we could really think about. I know in an earlier call the three of us were talking about a provocation for maybe some folks who might be interested in this in the audience would be, I think it's a great challenge to make like the XR podcast. Like what is that like? How is it different from how we experience podcasts today? And there's so much to do in this space. It really is powerful.
Yeah.
So before I open it up to the audience, what are some common mistakes or missteps that you see creators that are maybe kind of starting off or even more established in this space making? And how can we avoid them in the future as we move forward? I mean, Savannah, your list of best practices is certainly a great place to start. But if you have
the
any...
less practices.
Yeah, or if there's any advice just sort of as like, things to avoid or common missteps.
I think it's subjective, but I really get upset, and this happens a lot when we'll be creating a VR experience or you experience someone else's, and you get in there, and first of all, sometimes it's unavoidable to have a call to action, but it's definitely something I try to avoid when I'm working with AR or VR. I don't want to type on the screen what you have to do. I would really like to induce your curiosity to you decide to do it by yourself. That's one just pet peeve, but the other thing is there seems to be a lot where it's like, look straight ahead at the content we're giving you directly in front of you, and I always do this. I always look around behind me just to see if there's anything going on anywhere else. And I don't know, 7 times out of 10, there's like nothing going on in the 360 space. So I think, why did they make it in VR if there's nothing else going on around you that you can look at? So that's one of my sort of judgmental pet peeves.
I would say generally when I have like a sort of a don't do this list, it's around discomfort. I mean, we have to all remember that this, I guess I'm speaking more about wearable spatial computing than mobile AR in this case, but I think a lot of it might apply to mobile AR too. So mobile AR aside, in the wearable spatial computing category like VR and MR, it's a wearable, so it is a device that's sort of on the user's body, and it's in some ways a kind of a part of their body for the duration of the experience. So discomfort's always a risk, and creating a comfortable experience needs to be the highest priority for any creator in the space. I touched a little bit on kind of ways to create cognitive comfort by having experiences that aren't too complicated, because it is kind of a high bandwidth. The real world's high bandwidth, so your content has a lot to compete with for user attention, and user attention is limited. In terms of visual comfort, every display technology has its own kind of quirks and idiosyncrasies, and they get very technical with the way that the display is and the way the light field and projectors are and things. And so really reading best practices for that display, like at Magically we have very specific recommendations for font size, for certain colors to use, for certain distances to place content, so that you have the best visual comfort and the best visual fidelity. Placing content beyond like a physical boundary of the environment, like if you render content at a depth so that you can see the content past a wall, that makes sense, like the content looks like it's at a depth further than this boundary of the physical environment, like a wall, that can cause discomfort. There's things like that outlined in best practices, and those need to be really carefully kind of read and internalized and checked in your experience. There's also physical discomfort when, with certain types of, I think, direct interactions, like Tanandi and Dr. G are two experiences on our platform that are so fun because they're so embodied. In Dr. G, you're like holding up your arms to like fight robots that are coming out your walls. It's just crazy. It's really cool. And then in Tanandi, you're reaching out and directly interacting with content with your hands. But they can be tiring after a while, and I don't think that's a bad thing. I think that's a cool feature of the experience. I find VR to be very physically tiring, very physically uncomfortable. I mean, I love VR, but it's uncomfortable. So keeping that in mind, using peripheral devices as inputs to give users breaks, thinking about how many calories they're going to burn in your experience. It's like lame, and I think some people are like, oh, don't ring on the parade, gestures are so cool. But my thought is like, gestures is like cake. You don't want to have it every meal. You want to have it like sometimes, and it's going to be really delicious when you do, but you also want to balance it with other inputs just to keep the user from fatiguing.
Let them eat cake.
It's for sure.
So this next question is, I've been struggling with how to articulate it. As a creator, I want to make the most innovative piece of work, and I want as many people to see it. And in this space now, we that's a real challenge. There's some inherent challenge there, right? Where some of the most innovative technology is not available for the largest amount of people to see. And I loved how you addressed it in your presentation, and so it's sort of like, how do you balance that as a creator? And then how do you create a version of your experience that kind of comes down to more of the lower fidelity experience that larger mass audiences might be able to experience?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and one that I think clients and us always sort of you got to ask where the metrics of success are always at the beginning of every job or project, and I think if two levels, if it's for a commercial project for a client or a brand, then it's okay. Usually, if it's on sort of a really innovative technology that not many people have access to, they're always going to sort of document it in a different way and gain media
that are not isolated. Is there a way right now, even?
It's something I'm really passionate about. It's my focus at Magic Leap is shared experiences and communication and collaboration. And it's a technical challenge, I think, because grounding content in space is hard enough for one device, let alone for two devices to do that by themselves and from inside-out tracking and then reconcile that and with each other. So it's a technical challenge to be able to have face-to-face experiences with virtual content and spatial computing. But I think we're close to solving it. But that's on device. In terms of off device, streaming from devices is so fun. I mean, the best VR setup you can do is like you have your device in your like living room or something, and you have the computer hooked up to like a projector like behind the person, and then everybody can like watch what they're seeing as they're playing, and like that's like the way to do the VR living room party for sure. So finding equivalence in spatial computing, I think, is important. And as I said too, I think the onus is on the platforms in some cases, like in the case of Magic Leap, to improve its capability of capturing content, of publishing content, of streaming content, and of having shared experiences. And again, that's something we're really actively working on for our next release, couple releases.
Cool.
I just wanted to talk really about this thing that we've been working on, and then I checked myself. I don't think I legally can. but if you could imagine what, so Magic Leap is like on a headset, and that might not be sort of affordable, or it's not like completely sort of dispersed amongst everyone right now. But there's also opportunities for, I was talking about how Facebook is relying, and Snapchat and those guys are sort of relying on smartphone technology to keep up with them, and that's what limits our sort of creating in that space. But there's also room for a market, and I'm sure the Amazons of the world have products for this, and lots of companies, but products that aren't necessarily like as advanced as a mixed reality headset, but could translate AR experiences at sort of a higher level than 2 megabyte projects, but that is specifically built for that. So it's like better than a smartphone, but it's just specifically meant for like video chat or something like this, which made me think like, oh, I don't know how many years ago it was that we got really good internet and could actually FaceTime someone on the other side of the world, and it's perfect. Like, that's crazy. And the sort of the speed at which we're moving is pretty unbelievable. So don't be limited by what you think is happening right now.
Awesome. Can we open it up for some questions in the audience? If anyone has any questions, please raise your hand, and we'll have a microphone that'll come right to you. Please speak into the microphone. Thank you.
Great talk. So I'm a programmer and filmmaker, so I have 2 questions. So from the filmmaking point of view, this is a film conference, after all, interactive release, is how do I do a zero budget, indie, even bad, like I started on YouTube, like just bad, indie budget, zero volumetric capture short film, right? And how do I basically capture actors rather than generate content using like game engines? And the second question is, the most exciting thing I felt at LeapCon in LA was the Mica AI project. So can you talk about that and how we would incorporate AI into our projects?
So just remember the first question. Are you talking about 360 content?
No, not VR. VR, obviously, that's a different, we're filming in VR right now.
Yeah.
So I can capture actors in VR pretty easily. But how do I capture actors in volumetric space? Like volumetric capture, I guess maybe not volumetric broadcasting, volumetric. Yeah, so how do I do it at as close to zero budget as possible?
Yeah, like low budget mocap is kind of what you're asking for.
Or zero budget?
Or zero.
I would really like to know.
I think you can hack something together like a Connect.
I was going to say
I think
Connect.
you can Google some Connect mocap situation, find what you're looking for probably. I also, like, again, we shipped this experience, Avatar Chat, 3 weeks ago, and one of the things I'm most excited for is kind of low budget vocab. I mean, we capture really expressive facial expressions with inside-out tracking with our device, and I think our avatars look really cool, and hopefully some of you guys can try it soon. The experience, it really does. You get a sense of presence with the person on the other side. And spatialized audio helps, and their movements in the environment are real, and I'd love to see people, we also have a set of tools to create custom avatars. I'd love to see people use that type of technology. I'm sure similar experiences.
But those are all like pre-existing avatars. How do I actually capture an actor right here?
Oh, yeah. I guess some sort of Connect thing is probably what I would do.
And I was looking up Connect the other day, and I don't think they sell them anymore. So get on eBay and like odd Connects. I don't think they're in production anymore, but they're really, really cool for, I guess, cheap volumetric captures and hooking up to whatever.
I will check out Dev's Kit. It's an open source tool. It's a Connect hack that is all about volumetric capture.
To your second question about Mica, I'm not. That is a Magic Leap project, and I'm not involved in that part of our company. It's really cool, but I encourage people here to do some Googling and read some of the thoughts about it. But I think there's a lot of like great speculative work on how AI will become a tool that storytellers can use, and I think that's all I can say about it. Is that I think it's exciting, and it's something people should go explore.
I'm ashamedly not familiar with Mecca, so.
Oh yeah. I know it.
There's a question back.
Hi, thank you all. It's been a really very interesting talk, so thank you for everything. I'm curious, just I work for EarthX Film and curate like our interactive for things that are like nature and environment and endangered species related. So I was really curious about the Insomniac seedling, and then also the Seguros thing looked kind of environmental nature-y. So what are the like exhibition options for that? Like how do you take that on the road and show it, and is that something we could include? And I was also curious about the floating piece with the turtles. I wasn't sure what that was.
Oh yeah, that's Create.
That was beautiful.
It has a lot of natural characters and stuff in it. I don't know if I have I think it depends. I think reaching out to those projects, people like Insomniac, they made Seedling, Magic Leap Studios made Create, and Magic Leap Studios also made Tanani. In terms of like exhibiting and showing that work, I think that would be a great place to reach out.
I don't know what scope of sort of directing and sort of art you're into, but I think there's definitely in New York lately there's been, and in lots of places. I just live in New York, so I have that to relate to, but a lot of AR gallery spaces. So you go in, it's like maybe a couple of tracking markers, and you can go in with an iPad, or they give you an iPad or whatever, and you go around, and the whole exhibition is AR. And I think that's really cool. It's kind of like a very new media art space, and I don't know if that's something you're interested in, but I could see environmental stuff doing very well in that space.
Thank you.
We at Magic Leap also we have a sort of as Sally mentioned, we have a grant available for people who want to apply right now to fund your indie project or less indie project also I think would count, which I encourage you to go check out.
Yeah, and in terms of, just on the back of that, in terms of like, you're probably feeling like, where on earth do I get funding for my idea and all these kind of questions. If you have a good sort of proposal or idea, believe it or not, like a lot of these companies are, especially, the big ones, are looking for people with ideas. And because this is such a like open dev space as well, and I know most of us aren't developers, but it is they're definitely looking for like, bring on like not free creative, but they're like, you got ideas, like come to us and we'll like help you make them.
For sure.
Bose has a very similar fund to what Magic Leap is, and I think you're absolutely right. These companies that are creating the tools of future storytelling are looking for creators to flex their muscles with them. And if you come to them with a good story pitch, you'd be surprised at how far you can get.
Yeah.
Are there any other questions? There's one in
I think it's on.
Yeah.
Hi, thank you so much for coming. I wanted to ask you, since you've mentioned the grant for Magic Leap a couple times already, what would be your top advice for anybody looking to apply, if you have any? I mean, a lot of it was in your presentation, so I think everybody here is very lucky if they're gonna apply. Like, I hope you took a lot of pictures and videos. I certainly, my phone died. I was like struggling, like, oh my god. But in any case, I'd love to hear what you have to say. Also about the ideas, right? So there's a lot of storytellers here in this conference. Maybe not everybody is as adept with the technology that's coming in. How does that function with the developers for this kind of content and the ones that are behind the stories and the ideas?
I would echo Sally's advice about really researching, really thinking through how you do it, communicating that you've thought through this. I think that's going to put your idea, set them apart for sure. Just to have something really thorough. I hope that there's lots, for people who don't maybe have access to specific platforms, I think there's an opportunity to create cross-platform in some way, building your project in Unity and creating a plan for how you would achieve cross-platform support with like HoloLens, Magic Leap, etc., so that you could increase distribution, so you can kind of juggle with access and device. And I know that in Broward, where I'm based, or Magic Leap is based, We have an excellent library there. Then they have a bunch of HoloLenses that they just let anybody check out and use and develop on. I hope that, and I can't say too much right now, but I hope that you guys will be able to see some Magic devices being available in those in that way too, and institutions like museums and libraries and other types of funds and spaces for creators, I think, have a cool opportunity to make these devices available for lots of people to develop work on until they're more readily available to people.
Yeah, I would also suggest, so the first thing, like pitching ideas to companies, if there's a grant out or just any of your ideas, make it really, from a delivery perspective, make it really succinct and get your pitch across in a very clear way. I tend to struggle myself with pitching to clients that I tend to be very verbose and write too much about how I feel, and really it's more important that you just get like 3, however many points across of what you experience, what you want to happen. Make it elevator pitchable would be my advice in that area.
I think that's great advice.
That is excellent advice.
And then, what was the second part we were talking about?
I think
Access to do, sorry. Yeah, and I did mention this before. I feel like this is a cool space to be in compared to, say, traditional filmmaking, because developers and sort of computer tech and the internet allow us to sort of engage with peers that we don't even know. We can network online without even face-to-facing with a person. And I'm a really shy person, but I feel very comfortable emailing another creative at any other company and just being like, hey, you work there, I know you've got this background, and I have this idea. And so you can network even without, being the most confident person in the room. And I think there's a lot of gusto to that in this space. Like you can sort of get information from developers who are technical that you want to bounce ideas with, and they have more experience in another area. I don't know. That's how I would approach it as well.
There's a quote that I heard from Douglas Rushkoff, which I think is good advice in this space, and I think it adds on to one of your best practices, Savannah. And he says something to the effect of, tell a new story in an old way or an old story in a new way. And it gets very dangerous when you're telling a new story in a new way, because not only are you trying to get people to understand the narrative that you're telling, but you're having to get them understand what the interface is and the gestures and this and that. So if you tell an old story, a classic, in a new way, that's something that people can understand, because they can go, oh, I need to be more focused on the interface as opposed to the narrative. So maybe keep that in mind as well. I think we have time for 1 or 2 more questions if there are any.
My first question is accessibility for those with disabilities in VR. Like you were speaking about movements, and I was thinking about individuals who maybe aren't as motor, don't have as much control over their movements. Is there a market for that?
That's a great question, and I would like to say every time I speak, somebody asks that question, which I'm just wowed by it. Like I'm really, really excited that the community in this space is thinking about accessibility and inclusion sort of day one. And I think when we imagine like building a more humanist computing future, it has to have that inclusive sensibility at the start. We have to be different from past paradigms of technology. We can't make their same mistakes. So I think prioritizing inclusion is key. And we have a long way to go with that at Magic Leap. We still don't have CVA full compliance, but we did, in the tight timelines, we developed a kind of a foundational interaction model that we knew would allow us to scale to having not only compliance, but just being very inclusive about people who are differently abled. And the way we did that is we built our navigation system on like a 5-way model, up, down, left, right, confirm, rather than baselining it at 6-off control, like gesture, with our own EM tracking 6-off system. And the reason why we did that is because we thought about people with people who needed voice to interact with the system, people who needed like a puff and sip type of interface to interact with the system, or eye gaze. People who kind of have the most challenge in disability, would they be able to successfully just navigate the operating system? In some ways, that was actually like this is another, I think, longer talk for maybe a different venue, but that was, I think, at the time a really controversial design choice that our team made, because we were taking like the sexiest inputs, like stick off, EM tracking, move your hand everywhere, and like gesture, and we were sort of saying like, oh, we'll get to those later. Let's start with just a touch interaction model, because it's sort of based on like an up-down, like a joystick interaction model, basically up, down, left, right, confirm, and people were like, that's so boring, it's so over. But that, it was creating a foundation on that, and then layering on more embodied controls. I think that is how we create like an accessible platform, and it does ready us now to be able to go after the various requirements to have CBA compliance, and it's a goal that we're focusing on right now. We also think about inclusion in the design of our avatars. That was a big challenge too, to be able to create a system that to be able to represent the full range of human identities, the full range of human skin tones, especially on an additive light display, where rendering darker, richer colors and richer skin tones was a technical challenge for the capabilities of our projector. And the team had like a lot of really innovative design and texture and in color decisions, and to be able to have a really rich range of skin tones in our avatars. So yeah, we do think a lot about that. It's the responsibility of this medium and the creators in it to do something different than people in tech have done in the past, which is prioritize humans.
Awesome, thank you. So in that, when you had the meeting, the woman, her avatar wasn't as dark as she was, right? In that like living room meeting space, like that's kind of similar, like in the same space. Because my next question was, will people be able to like create, like have a meeting and create something that's in it, like draw on a touch pad, and like then it will show up for everyone in the meeting?
Yeah. So we do support sharing applications in an avatar chat call. So you can drag and drop the gallery, for example, or other applications in our Lumen platform into an avatar session, and everyone can see you interacting with it in real time. And we are expanding that platform capability to be able to to have what we envision as landscapes of shared content that everybody can sort of see and interact with. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I guess so. It's just like he was cooking, and like he would show pictures, but it wasn't like, I don't know.
Yeah. In that scenario, he was. It was maybe a confusing story, but he was sort of showing the images to everybody on the call, sort of virtually. If that makes sense.
There's a little dirt on that one. It was a friend of mine directed that, and and they pulled me into a room late one night, and they said, "Sally, come into this room, and you're going to watch something, and just tell us if you understand what's happening."
I imagine that you had to do that. Yeah.
And there was like 20 people in the room, and I sort of. I was like, I think they're doing this and this and this, and they're like, yeah, good job.
Yeah, that was a complicated project. It's a longer story that I can tell once we're off the 360 camera.
We have time for one more question.
But yeah, props to Bill on that.
If
That
there
was
is
a
one.
tough project.
There's one question.
So here I am again. Hi. My name is Anna. So I was wondering, in terms of the capability of live streaming with AR, like how is that looking now, or how will it look in the future? Like, so just to give you a context, I have an online radio show called Analytical Beat. Is Facebook broadcasted? If I wanted to take that experience into augmented reality, how would that happen? How soon could that happen? How accessible would it be for people like me?
Sorry, it's like a communicating experience with people. Is that the?
So the show is in online radio, audio,
Oh, so
but it's
online.
also Facebook broadcasted.
Okay.
So
I get it.
I'm thinking about the interaction between augmented reality and live content, like live broadcasting content. If that is there any intersection there? Like, will we be able to see a sort of like a Princess Leia, but like in real time? You see what I'm saying?
Yeah. I work on a couple of projects with Facebook right now, and some of them, like, I don't use personally as a platform, like Messenger, video chat, and to be honest, some of the projects are being launched in different countries that aren't accessible here because they're being tested. But it's all about using AR. It's sort of a two-way conversation. It's not like a radio thing, but it is all about being able to use sort of AR while you're video chatting, which is, to be honest, mostly on the person and in their environment, and not like the flipped, like, let's say they're projecting the live action in another place as an AR avatar or something. But I feel like we're pretty damn close, and that's really accessible to everyone.
Yeah, I think live performances, live broadcasts, live content, it's like a really rich space for innovation on the creative side, like new forms that could take in this medium, and innovation on the technology side too, to overcome some of these challenges like outside-in tracking, inside-out tracking of live experiences, and also like streaming that really high like heavyweight content. There's some companies doing this that I think they're like right on the edge of making some really cool breakthroughs in accessibility of this stuff. I would. It sounds like for what you do, a kind of outside in tracking, like some kind of reel to make some hacks for the sake of experimentation, because there's just like a readiness of this type of emerging technology that we need to reach that point, I think.
When you do get to that point, one sort of thing we talk about a lot at work is avatars versus like the personal communication of still being able to recognize someone. So we do all these things to distort our faces and whatnot and use them as facial controllers, but there's a lot of value to be had from still being able to recognize the person, and avatars certainly totally they make you, you're in disguise. And the other thing that humans do when they're in disguise, and the internet's a really good example of this, is they become quite, mean is the word that comes to mind, but we are quite, we're very confident when we're not able to being recognized, and there's a certain level of personal communication that is lost in that space. So I'd say if it's a radio show, be very careful of how far you abstract the content in that sense.
Well, I just want to say thank you very much, Savannah and Sally. We could go on and on, but we got to wrap right now, so thank you very much. If there are any other questions, I'm sure you can grab Savannah or Sally at the rest of the festival. Please feel free. Thanks again for coming.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Cool. Thank you so much, Michael. Thank you so much. Thanks so much.
Hello, I want to thank you all for joining us today at the Filmgate Interactive Media Festival. I would just want to let you know you can check out the Magic Leap experiences at the VR portal at Mana Miami. And also tonight at 7 o'clock we have a VIP party at Mana Miami, so you don't want to miss that. Tickets are being sold at the door. And tomorrow morning we're starting at 8:30 with breakfast with the women in film and television. And also you don't want to miss the keynote speaker from Joanna Poffer of HP. She's going to be talking about what's going to happen with your personal computers in the future. So you all have a good evening, be safe, and see you bright and early tomorrow morning.